It is a great Tuesday night. I forgot what day it was for a second, but we are back with an episode of List for a draft preview. Jordan is traveling. Kev might be joining us soon, but I am here with a special guest, Ian Cummings of PFSN. Got to get those right. Ian joined us a couple years ago. Ian, it's great to have you back. And we were talking right beforehand, but this draft season is quite a different one than what we're used to. So I think the only thing we know is Fernando Mendoza is number one, but how do you see it going after that?
Yeah, it's anyone's guess. And by the way, I don't fault you for not knowing the date. I this time of year I measure the days by how many days left until the NFL draft. You know, it's the countdown, right? And it's running, a month out, 2 months out. And so it's been fun. It's been a very, very labor intensive cycle, but Fernando Mendoza at least helps ease the load a little bit. We know pretty much that he's going to be the guy at number one overall. The Raiders have a need at QB, and they have other needs too. But when you have an opportunity to get a franchise QB without having to trade up, it's my opinion that if you don't have to give up additional capital, if he can elevate your roster, you should make the pick because you might not be able to the next year, right? So we can reasonably deduce that's what's going to happen. But you mentioned it. Like after that, it's anyone's guess. I think, Arvell Reese will probably be in the top 5. I think David Bailey has been trending up this entire cycle. I don't think he makes it. If he does make it out of the top 5, won't be too far. Guys like, Carnell Tate potentially could be up there. But this class is very unique too, in the sense that a lot of the guys who are top rated on the board aren't at premium positions, right? Jeremiah Love is widely expected to at least go in the top 7, maybe to the Titans at number 4, but running back, right? Caleb Downs, safety. Dylan Thieneman, safety as well. Sonny Styles, linebacker. Not a lot of premium positions, right? And you do have some of those highly rated offensive linemen and edge guys. Ruben Bain is a little polarizing, but most people still have him as a top 10 guy. But you don't have that established pecking order of blue chip premier positions that we've been accustomed to seeing, right? Last year was Abdul Carter. It was Armand Mambu, right? This year, a little bit more sparse in those positions, right? Now, there is a lot of depth in the mid rounds, I would say. And that's what makes this class exciting. I liken it to a bell curve, right? You don't have a ton of blue chip talent, but you have a lot of guys in the middle converging in that middle round range. And I'm of the mind that you can find starters at certain positions all the way down to round 5 even. So it's going to be a fun class to see how it settles out. We know it's going to happen potentially at number 1 overall, but after that, it's a whole mystery box. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah. So let's talk about Mendoza, because at this time last year, everybody was assuming Arch would be ready to come out. He wasn't ready, but we're talking about Garrett Nussmeier, Drew Aller, Lenore Sellers, who stayed in school as well. Yep. We're talking about them as the top prospects in this draft. We're not even talking about, most people aren't talking about Fernando Mendoza in September as the first overall pick. When you look at past drafts, or if we'd say a normal quarterback class where you'd see 3 or 4 guys considered first round picks, how would you judge Mendoza compared to some of the normal drafts? Like we can say compared to Cam Ward last year, even 2 years ago when we had 6 quarterbacks go in the top 12.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's not quite at the level of, say, a Drake May or Caleb Williams for me. I don't think he's a blue chip. Now, on my grading scale, I have a little bit when a quarterback is graded in round 1 range, I do give them a slight grade bonus, right? Because those quarterbacks, when they are legitimately worthy of round 1 capital, right, they take precedence a little bit. If you're a team that needs a QB and you're willing to take that guy, it's a little bit different when you have a day 2 QB who's expected to go round 1, right? Like Kenny Pickett a few years ago, he should not have gone round 1. Jackson Dart, people were a little bit split on that. He's had good returns so far with the Giants. I had a mid day 2 on him, right? So like I wouldn't have taken him round 1 either. Fernando Mendoza is a QB who graded mid first round without the grade bonus, and with it, he's on the blue chip fringe. So again, not quite at the level of Drake May or Caleb Williams, who were bona fide blue chip guys even without that. But I'd say Fernando Mendoza to me is pretty close to Cam Ward. I think stylistically they're a little bit different. I think Cam Ward is a better creator off script, off platform, as far as having the flexibility to work off script and throw from different arm angles. But Fernando Mendoza is a really, really good, gunslinger in the pocket. He can identify quick, angle advantages in coverage. He's got the arm velocity and the ability to, throw with accuracy and precision situationally as well. And then the clutch gene, time and time again, Big Ten championship, CFP playoffs, he is delivering when it counts. And that toughness goes a long way. I'd say he grades pretty similarly to Jaden Daniels for me too. But again, different archetypes. I think Jaden Daniels was a guy who was fast, dynamic, accurate. I think Mendoza has a bigger arm. I think Mendoza is a little more durable, right, with his frame and his build naturally. But again, a guy who I think can elevate your roster in the right circumstances and can help you compete for a Super Bowl.
Okay. Kev, welcome. Join us fashionably late. No problem. Glad to have you.
What's up?
What's up? And we're talking about obviously Mendoza's going one. And I'll throw Ian. I'll go to you and then Kev for this.
Yeah.
Draft starts at 2. Everybody I think is assuming Arvell Reese is the guy. But it does feel like there's a little bit of difference. You have some people who are super high on David Bailey. Ruben Bain is such an interesting prospect because of the arm length, because I believe he's literally 1 of 1. He's going to be the only guy ever drafted this high with arms his size. So is he an outliner or just something we can't judge? But Ian, if you're drafting for the Jets, and Kevin and I are Dolphins fans, so we'd say we take a punter. But if you were drafting number 2 overall, who are you taking? It doesn't even have to be a pass rusher, but do you see anybody, especially for a coach who's, I don't think anybody expects to make it to November, and knowing the Jets, the GM's probably going to be going for his job too. What would you do in their situation?
Yeah, it's a really unique situation again because we don't have a ton of blue chip talent at premium positions that don't have potential questions, right? With Ruben Bain, you mentioned it's the arm length. I know people have talked about David Bailey's run defense being a little, I think he projects well long term in run defense. Actually, I think he does have the proportional length to stack blocks and at least contend there. I think he can acquire leverage pretty well for his size, and then has enough compact mass as well. So I'm a little more optimistic with him, but run defense has been flagged for him. And then obviously Arvell Reese, the positional designation. Every time I mock him to the Cardinals, for instance, Cardinals fans are very apprehensive about those kinds of tweeners, right? Where do they project exactly? So
Isaiah Simmons probably had them on that.
Yeah, exactly. Isaiah Simmons, Zaven Collins as well. So they have the history there for sure. But Arvell Reese is a compelling talent. Otherwise, I think looking at my draft board, if I was asking what I would do, right? Sonny Styles is my top overall prospect. I don't know if they would take him there just because they signed Demario Davis as a vet. Now, short-term veteran deal. They also have Jamie and Sherwood, but he took a step back last year. So if we're going pure BPA, I would not rule out Sonny Styles as much as off-ball linebacker is not viewed as one of those premium positions. Having a guy of his caliber at that spot, 6'5", 240, high 4.4 speed, but again, also the ability to come downhill with physicality, right? The ability to read gap looks and congestion and kind of oscillate to fluctuations in real time, play physical at the point of attack and stack blocks and play up to his size. And then he's got pass rushing chops too. Back in 2024, when he was unleashed a little bit more often as a blitzer in that Ohio State defense, he had a over 30% pass rush win rate. You see the burst, the bend. Again, the size projects well in that role too. So if we're going pure BPA, I would not rule out Sonny Styles because they only really have short-term assets at the off-ball linebacker position, and he can be a do-it-all X factor for sure. If we're going edge rusher, I think as much as Arvell Reese, it's been kind of scrutinized. He actually measured in a little bit smaller than Styles. I really think he plays bigger than his size with the power output and the play strength. I think we saw that in 2025. His ability to just completely reset the point and erode his opponent's center of gravity with super explosive power outputs, and then the ability also to cave in the pocket when he's rushing from wider alignments and has more space to build up and just completely overrun his guy. And then he flashes some really impressive cornering ability for his size too, right? Obviously still learning the nuances of the edge position, not having experience at that full time. But, against Drew Shelton, who's a pretty athletic tackle in his own right, he was acquiring angle advantages very efficiently, rolling off the edge, and then was able to corner at really tight angles around the apex too. So that bend and finesse and speed, in addition to the power element, I think you look at all of the traits that Arvell Reese has and all the traits that you can build up. He's a very compelling one too. So if we're going pure BPA, I'd probably say Sonny Styles. If we're adhering to the premium positions, I'd probably go with Arvell Reese. But either one, I think just adding blue chip talent to the defense is probably the way to go.
Okay. Kev, as I go to you, and you got to actually act like you're the Jets GM and not a Dolphins fan. Our friends over at Scout Vision says this is what they're projecting as the top 8. Do either of you guys see any issues with that? And then, Kev, what would you do for the Jets?
The only one I could see is Maui Goa or Maui
Mhm.
Noah, because I just truly don't know where he goes. I feel like the range is anywhere from 3 to like 15, truthfully, just because there isn't like Ian mentioned, there isn't a blue chip prospect at offensive tackle. There's a lot of guys in a very similar range, and so it's really going to be dealer's choice. And Maui Noah, while I think he's an incredibly talented player, is also more likely probably a guard in the NFL. And do teams take guard at 3? The Cardinals might, because they need offensive linemen desperately.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I could also see him going like Monroe Freeling and a couple other guys in that range. As for the Jets, I kind of just look at that defense and go, I don't know, man, just take anyone on that defense, because truly, right, they have like maybe one or two guys who are considered to me like long-term developmental chip pieces on that defense. Everyone else is either a short-term option or a replaceable player, all things considered. So for me, it comes down to Arvell Reese or Ruben Bain. Uh, my issue with Arvell Reese is not that he doesn't have a position, it's that I think you need to choose a position. I think when you draft a guy like this, you can't be doing the whole, well, he's going to play Mike, but he's also going to play edge thing, right? Like, I think he's either got to be an edge or he's got to be a Mike linebacker. And projecting him as an edge rusher for me is fairly difficult, not because I don't think he can be a good edge rusher, but it's because I don't know what the frame looks like when we get it immediately. What's the baseline for his pass rush moves, his counters, everything that we need from him as a pass rusher? We just haven't seen enough of it, in my opinion, to grade him as like the best edge rusher in the class. I've been kind of Ruben Bain's biggest supporter since day one. I've been like, hey, man, this guy's a day one certified starter. I don't give a crap if he's got T Rex arms. I don't give a crap if he's got, this, that, or the other thing. I think when you watch him play, his power, his tenacity, his versatility, right? He can play inside, he can play outside. There's so much that he can do that for me, it feels like a no brainer if I was the Jets GM to take him number 2 overall. I think the way I see it is this guy is a day one starter, and this guy is a damn good pass rusher in the NFL for a long time. And truthfully, if he makes 2, 3 Pro Bowls in his career and he's one of the best edge rushers in football, that's a great pick at 2. That's a great pick at any pick in the draft. And uh, I don't see the arm length as a big issue, because when you watch him play against Texas A&M and you watch him play against Indiana and you watch him play in the college football playoff, none of those offensive tackles gave him an issue. He was playing against some potential NFL guys at both offensive tackle spots. So the way I see it, they have Will McDonald and they have Joseph Asai, I think is their like edge 2 right now.
Mhm.
All things considered, man, you got to get a pass rusher who's competent, because if Joseph Asai is rushing the passer week 1 for you, Aaron Glenn's job might as well be done in week 1. We might as well be planning a new regime in week 1, because I feel like you just failed any real development that you're having for a defense that has a ton of question marks, not just at edge rusher, but also at corner, in the secondary, at linebacker long term. I think you got to take best player available. For me, that is Ruben Bain, although I do love the Sonny Styles shout, man.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just a fun pick to try and build a defense around, especially when you look at what some like the 49ers defenses have done with Fred Warner.
Yeah. And Ian, I got to tell you, I love that you put Sonny Styles as your best overall player. So a couple months ago, Jordan and I actually did a mock draft, and it's a fun story. We actually mocked Sonny Styles to us at 11 because we're like, well, he'd be the best player.
Mhm.
Everybody ripped us. They're like, you don't take a linebacker that early. And now everybody's like, he's probably not getting past the Giants. Man, he is like, him and Caleb Downs to me are the 2 best players in college football. And I really don't think it's close. They allowed Arvell Reese to do a lot of the stuff he did. Granted, so did people like Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, and Caden McDonald. But yeah, Styles, like, he's a stud, man. And I know you don't normally take linebackers early. I would take him early too. So I do like that shout. A name Scott's Vision has up here, though, Morgan Freeling. There has been some word about him going as high as the Browns, and I think that comes down to him being the best pure left tackle in the draft. I know he's tested really well. It is interesting how we've gone from talking about Maui Noah and Spencer Fernando all season as the top 2 tackles. Is Freeling just, in your opinion, both of your opinions, is Freeling just people buying into the draft season hype and he's going to get overdrafted, or is he that good?
I'm on the fence with that because he is a little bit overinflated in the consensus now after the NFL Combine compared to my board. But again, I can also see the reasoning for it. I sit on the fence habitually. It's a problem I need to address. I do it way too often. But with Monroe Freeling, again, I can legitimately see both sides because here's a guy who tested 6'7", 314, near 35-inch arms. I think he ran a 4.9 something 40-yard dash, sub 173. 10-yard split, over 30-inch vertical, over 9 foot broad. Like the testing was through the roof with this guy. And you watch the tape and the athleticism, it's corroborated there. I mean, he is explosive, he's rangy, but I also love his flexibility when it comes to hinging around on reach blocks or stacking blocks in the run game. I think he's got pretty good angle IQ there and range. And then in pass protection too. Like with that size and athleticism, he gets to his landmarks quickly, and he's such an obstructing force with that width and mass alone, right? And then at the same time too, I think he has pretty good flexibility for, as it lends to acquiring leverage and swiveling his base back and keeping that anchor footwork stable, right? I do think his hand usage is relatively rudimentary right now, and that's one of the big reasons that it is a little bit too high for me, right? I think he's kind of raw operationally still, but I also think he has a lot of qualities, and he has that certain framework that can help raise his floor early on, as far as the athleticism, the size, the length, the hand power, the anchor strength, and then the flexibility that helps him play with a little bit lower center of gravity than you would expect for a guy who's 6'7", right? It's one of those qualities. I'm not making this as a player comp by any stretch. They're vastly different. I was much higher on the player that I'm about to bring up, but Joe Alt was 6'8", and he was so flexible that he could consistently swivel his base back and keep his anchor beneath him. And I do see that flexibility with Monroe Freeling. I think Freeling is definitely very good at playing lower than you'd expect for his size. And I think that's going to be an asset for him, right, as he continues to refine his game. So again, the top 10 talk is a little bit rich for me, but the tools are S tier. And then he does have that flexibility fail-safe that makes me feel a little bit better about banking on his long-term potential. He's not my OT1. He's not my OT2. He's not my OT3. I've got Lomu and Maui Noa at the top of my board personally. And then Fano was also there, although Fano, there's some interior projection with him. I like him at either spot. I think I would let him try at tackle first. But at the same time, I do think Monroe Freeling, you put him side by side with these guys, his tools are probably the best of the bunch. So you invest in that. You take the fail-safe into account. I can understand the top 10 talk. It's a little rich for me, but I can understand it.
Yeah. No, they won't give much. Mr. S, they will not give Glenn much say. Kev, your opinions on Freeling?
If there's one thing I've learned, it's that NFL teams are a sucker for height, weight, speed, and position. And it's like Monroe Freeling, I think his tape is good, not amazing. I think that you're really betting on this like traditional 5-tool player developing. I think he needs some help with like his hand placement consistency and some of his stuff in terms of reaching his landmarks. But man, this is the most athletically gifted offensive tackle in this class. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. I think you're right. Like the NFL is always going to take the 6'7" guy who runs a 4.9, 5, 4.93, has his arm length, has his flexibility. Those things, NFL teams just take that. And is he going to be a top 10 pick for me if I was just picking it based off what I would do? Absolutely not. But man, I think you look at a team like Arizona who just needs developmental offensive linemen. You take a look at teams after Arizona who need offensive line help, and there are so many in the top 10. There's going to be a team that just takes him because they think they can develop him. And I think there's enough on film for me to feel confident in saying that he can be a good offensive tackle. This isn't like the third or fourth round pick offensive tackle where you're like, well, he's physically there and he is probably the traditional track star at offensive tackle, but the film sucks. The film does not suck for Monroe Freeland. It's just not as good as Maui Noah's is or Fano's is. It's good. It's not great. And I think truthfully, there's just going to be some team who takes him. And so I feel like it's almost a lock that he goes in the top 10 just because NFL teams are a sucker for that. And when NFL teams like something, they're just going to take it and deal with the consequences later, whether it's them losing their job or, them being praised as the smartest GM in the room. And so I think when you look at a team like Arizona, it feels like a no-brainer that he's at least a consideration for third pick and then a team like Cleveland later on in the top 10, it feels like a no-brainer that one of those teams just takes him.
Yeah, Cleveland in particular has always felt like, because they love the size there too. But it's tricky, right? Because you would want your team to be confident in their developmental ability, right? Like, oh yeah, of course we can coach this guy up. That's what our coaches are hired to do. But it's a tried and true, it's the tale as old as time. Drafting a guy who has that ceiling, but not quite that operational floor. Sometimes they don't reach that, right? So it's going to be tricky, but he's got the tools, like Kevin said. He's got the positional value, and those usually outweigh a lot of other stuff.
Yep. And to go kind of play off the Freeling talk, there's always someone that the draft community is super high on, that the draft comes along and they fall a lot later, or someone we don't talk about who goes higher. Ian, to go with you, since you cover the draft, who's someone that you're seeing all the draft community go, man, this guy's going to go super high, he's a stud, that you just don't get the feeling the NFL's as high on? And then the inverse, who do you think someone who's going to go a lot higher than we think they will?
It's a tricky question. I could go with the easy cop-out answer and say any of the safeties, like Caleb Downs or Dylan Thieneman, just because like safety positional value is we never seem to hammer that down. And Caleb Downs, I agree with what you said earlier. He's a top 3 player on my board. I'm a really big fan of the film, but the positional value just always seems to be deflated in the eyes of the NFL. Kyle Hamilton dropping to 14th overall, right? There's other examples too. I think Caleb Downs not even having that freakish size, speed, athleticism is going to work against him in that sense too. I think he's a very good athlete. I think we kind of underrate that sometimes. I think especially what I like about his game is the coverage mobility. I think he's very fluid. I think he's got a great swivel and zone coverage. I think he's very efficient planning and driving. There's not a ton of delay. There's no hitches on his hip sync or anything. So I have no concerns there. But the positional value doesn't have the size, speed, athleticism. And Corey Kinnan, who does great work in the draft space too, reported from the NFL Combine that he might be flagged for a potential meniscus issue in his knee as well. So if there's a medical issue clouding that too, then that can be another factor that brings him down the board, right? Dylan Thieneman is another one, although he's not really projected as an early first rounder. I have him as a top 10 player on my board personally. I'm a big fan of the film with him, but he's another one who maybe could fall late teens, early 20s, but I think another one that I bring up is Jordan Tyson. He seems to be a pretty polarizing player, and his durability has been called into question too, right? He never played a full healthy season at the collegiate level. His hamstring has been, preventing him from doing full workouts this offseason too. And there are some issues at the catch point as well. I think in general, he has really good body control, but sometimes when there's a contact threat, his resolve can be a little bit lower, and you worry about that, right? Mekhi Lemon, even though he's a little bit smaller, is the back shoulder god pretty much. I mean, he's so good at playing positioning out of the slot. And then Carnell Tate as well had a catch rate over expectation of like 25%, which is insane, right? So these guys excel at the catch point. Obviously, you don't want your primary mode to be catch point operation, but with Jordan Tyson, right, who's got the size, you want him to play up to that. And when he doesn't do that on top of the medicals, I could see him falling down the board a little bit. In terms of a guy who will probably go higher than we expect, I'm thinking in my head here, Blake Miller from Clemson is one, kind of in the same lens as Monroe Freeling. I mean, he checks all the boxes athletically, 6'7", over 310, I believe, 34-inch arms. And he started 53 or 54 games at Clemson. He has all of the experience, the athletic talent, and he's pretty rangy in space too. I mean, he's such a fun second level blocker to watch. I think his anchor can still improve a little bit in pass protection. I think we saw glimpses of improvement in 2025. It was a really big issue in 2024. I think he improved his anchor footwork in 2025, but I do think in general, he has the knee bend. He's got active hands. And then in the run game too, he's shown that he can reach his landmarks. He's shown that he can drive through with lower body power on leg churn. And again, he just has all of those kind of parameters that you look for when you're looking at premium position, height, length, mass, athleticism, and then experience too. So Blake Miller, probably the one that would be the biggest one. I'll throw another one into Kristen Miller from Georgia. Doesn't have the elite production, but there's no bona fide, surefire DT1 in this class. Peter Woods has been polarizing. Caleb Banks is the medical issues that'll probably push him into round 2 at the earliest. And Kristen Miller, here comes a guy who's 6'4", 320 with legit cinder blocks for hands. I mean, such heavy hands. He can stack and shed and two gap in the run game as an even front nose. And down the stretch in 2025, I think he's always had a pretty good quick twitch and explosion, linear explosion for his size. But you did see some flashes of pass rush success with whether it be club moves, heavy-handed club moves, or arm overs and swims. He's still developing that part of his game, but when you look at the defensive tackle position, you see a guy with a very, very high floor as a run defender and legitimate upside as a pass rusher. I'd have to think that that's going to elevate him in the eyes of NFL evaluators. So I could see Kristen Miller sneaking into round 1 as a surprise pick there. And I honestly think he could live up to it because he's got a really good profile.
Yeah. The two guys mentioned, Dylan Tiedemann and Blake Miller, those are guys everybody's like, okay, maybe you get them at late first, early second. But then you look at some other draft boards and it's like they're not getting past 18, according to some people. So those are good. Tiedemann's a guy, you watch some of his film, he pops, especially his Purdue film. You see just how instinctual he is. It's crazy. It's crazy. Kev, what about you?
In terms of guys who are going to go, who are probably not going to go as high as people.
Don't care. Dylan Tiedemann's a stud, Mr. S. Stop it.
In terms of players who are being mocked a little bit too high, I think the obvious answer is Akeem Mesidor, because while he was really productive this year in Miami next to Ruben Bain, and he has some positional flexibility, I think he's really good inside. We're talking about a 25-year-old rookie with injury concerns and length issues. Traditionally, I just don't think the NFL takes those guys as early as people mock them. And I've seen him go as high as like 15. I've seen him go as high as like after the top 10. It's like, I think that teams just traditionally take the prototypical edge rusher or the guy with like elite athleticism or the young age over the 25-year-old rookie who, while he's incredibly talented, has some red flags that are just hard for me to look past. And I think that he's going to be a productive player in the NFL. I think he's going to have a career as an edge 2, as an edge 3, as a guy who's in the NFL, but never the elite pass rusher on a team. But I just don't think he's going to be a top 15 pick. I think that's a guy who goes really late in the first round to a team like, not going to say Seattle takes him, but a team like Seattle where they just don't have as many needs. They can afford to take a guy at a premium position and kind of just take the player and not the need. And I think truthfully, when you look at like the top 15, I've seen him go to like Carolina. Carolina has needs. These teams at the top 15, top 18, they have needs. There's a reason they didn't advance far in the playoffs. And so I think traditionally those teams just take needs over, a guy who, while incredibly talented, is 25 years old. And that is a red flag, whether I think that it shouldn't be or not. Like, I think that's just a major red flag for NFL teams drafting. In terms of guys who I think are going to go higher than they're being mocked, the obvious answer is Max Iannaccio for a lot of the same reasons that Monroe Freeling is going to go really high. The Arizona State offensive tackle was really good at Senior Bowl. Is the athletic, kind of prototypical height, weight, speed guy, very similar to like Caden Proctor of Alabama. But he's just not, he has not had the film to support being, a top 15 pick. I think his film's good. Again, I think it has a way to go. And I think he's more of a developmental player than he is a surefire day one starter at the position. Still, when you look at this offensive tackle class, it would not shock me if he sneaks into the top 20. It would not shock me if one of those teams in the kind of the late teens who need an offensive tackle just take a guy like that because of how talented he is and because of what he can be, maybe not what he is now. I think like once you get past Carolina, you start to kind of see that range for him where it's like, oh, maybe a team takes him. Maybe a team really likes him and wants to develop him. One other guy who I don't think is getting enough love is San Diego State cornerback Chris Johnson. Look, I get it. Some of the recovery stuff and some of the man coverage stuff is a mixed bag. That's one damn good zone coverage corner. And teams are going to take zone coverage corners, especially later in the first round, once you get into like the mid 20s. When you look at some of those teams, I think Miami, for example, I think he perfectly fits in a Jeff Hafley defense. I think his coverage skills, his patience, his recovery speed, all of those things check a box for me. He's got the size. He was productive, in college. I think there's so much for me to be like, this guy probably ends up going in the first round. This guy probably ends up going earlier than anyone else expects him to. And when he gets drafted, there are some people who go, well, why are you taking San Diego State cornerback in the first round? Look, I've been, one of his biggest fans all draft cycle. I think he's an incredibly gifted player. I said on another podcast like 2 days ago, he feels like a no-brainer first round pick for me, even if he doesn't end up going in the first round. To me, that's just a guy who gets picked higher because NFL teams are going to take the zone coverage ability and say that they can fix some of the man coverage issues, which I think he has.
Ian, a couple different names in here I would like to get your opinions of that some people brought up. This is someone I actually think is not getting enough love. I'm seeing a lot of mocks have him in like the 70s. Deny Dennis Sutton. I feel he's probably a top 50 player. He's an athletic freak, special teams freak. The stats weren't there, but I think that has as much to do with Penn State just not taking to Jim Knowles' defensive system. But he was wreaking havoc in the Big Ten all year on a disappointing Penn State team, if we're being honest. But what are your opinions on Dennis Sutton, and where do you think he's probably going to go?
I think he'll probably go top 100. I have him just outside my top 100, so I'm a little bit. He's an athletic freak. I think linear athletic freak is the right way to word it because he's very explosive. I think he's got the speed to at least create angle advantages off the snap when he's rushing in a straight line, but he is a little stiff in the hips, and I think we see that continually, kind of affect his ability to roll his hips through the apex and reduce and sustain acceleration while cornering. And then on top of that too, being a guy who's got the power profile, I think his pass rush arsenal is still kind of underdeveloped. There are times when he appears to lack a pass rush plan or a counter plan as well. The precision can improve on his strikes and power rushes and power sequencing. But again, like you said, he's got the freak linear athleticism, right? He's got the mass, he's got the length, and he's got an unhinged motor. I mean, I keep going back to the Indiana game. He looked like he was having an out-of-body experience out there. Like the motor, you're never going to question that. I think in run defense, he's solid. I think there are times when the stiffness can affect his ability to get off blocks. But he can stack. He's got the strength to contend and establish half-man relationships, and the speed helps in pursuit. But again, I think the lack of pass rush refinement, I think the hip stiffness, I think those things mitigate his stock a little bit. So just outside my top 100, I would take him early day 3. But I think NFL teams are going to gravitate to the linear size speed profile, the motor, and the play strength and run defense, and probably take him top 100, especially with this edge class being kind of polarizing in that range. So I can see the NFL being higher on him. I like him in a certain respect, but I do think there's some limitations as well.
Okay. Yep. And Scouts Visions on has a wide receiver currently hurt. Sounds like he's close, but Chris Bell, like my buddy, our Twitter admin, Mr. S, loves Chris Bell, says he'd take Chris Bell at 30. Little rich for me as a Dolphins fan, just because I don't want any more injured players. Kev, I'll throw this to you and Andy in both. Thoughts on Chris Bell?
I mean, the talent's there. I have no issue with the talent. I have no issue with the ceiling. Again, it's just the injury concern. And it's not that like a torn ACL is a career ender in any sense, but there's enough talent in this wide receiver class that I don't think you have to take a guy like that. I really like Mekhi Lemon. I really like Carnell Tate. I really like Jordan Tyson, despite some of the injury concerns. I'm a big fan of Denzel Boston just because I think he grabs anything within a 5-mile radius of him. And he has like one of the highest contested catch, completion percentage or whatever the, new advanced analytic is for that in the class. And my favorite wide receiver in this class is Casey Concepcion, who is more of a slot kind of shifty guy. But I mean, turned on the film, outside of his quarterback being really bad at playing quarterback at a high level, enough about Marcel Reed. When you watch Casey Concepcion play, he's open every single time. He is always open. And I think when you have guys like that, you have a guy like Chris Brazzell, who is athletic, plays in an offense that is probably not very good to gauge wide receiver talent. And there's always going to be the Jalen Hyatt concerns there, because Jalen Hyatt was another one of these guys who everyone loved, but was not ready to play in the NFL. And there's a reason why he's not in the league right now as a starter. But I think there's just too much talent for me to reach for a guy like that with some of the concerns that he has. I think the film's really good. I think day 2, he's a perfect pick for almost any team. But in terms of a day one player, I think there's just enough talent at other positions for him to not be a day one guy for me.
Yeah, for me, I would tend to agree. I think the medical concerns, it was believed to be a clean tear. He had surgery on it. So ideally, deducing from those conclusions, should be able to get back to 100%, right? With time, right? Obviously, don't rush the way back. And I will say, when he was fully healthy and medicals weren't hanging over his head, he was being talked about more in the first round conversation. So reasonably speaking, if you're a team and you think that he is going to get back to 100%, I think there is a rationale to take him round one. I would be apprehensive before I've seen him there personally, right? I think that's the biggest question that's hanging over his head right now. When you look at the film and you look at the style and the profile, there are a lot of things to like. Obviously, 6'2", over 220, with potential 4.3 speed in open space, right? I mean, he chews up ground when he has a runway, when he has space to accelerate and kind of expand his strides. You can see him just warp tackling angles in real time. He's got that level of speed and explosion, which at 220 plus pounds, that is a rare size profile. And then on top of that, having the length, the catch radius to make plays away from his frame. And I think as a route runner too, even though he's not the most developed, I do think he's shown flashes of, what one thing that I look for in route runners is deceleration, right? Can you expand your strides vertically and then suddenly retract and decelerate on a dime? And I think Chris Bell has shown more of that than I would expect from a guy with his size. Obviously, the route tree was a little bit limited in that respect, but you do see some, and especially, in 2024, looking back there, you saw some comebacks on the boundary and he's decelerating and hinging back and showing more fluidity than you would expect for a 6'2", 220-pound guy too. So the run after catch is there. The size speed profile is there. I think the catch point, the catch radius and the hand strength is there as well. And then he's got the ability to keep developing as a route runner. So I think if we're not talking about medicals, first round is definitely a more realistic outcome for him. But like Kevin said, this wide receiver class is kind of a pick your poison type deal. There's a lot of players out there. I will say there aren't many players with Chris Bell's size, speed profile and rack profile, right? And I think that's where he's been separated, is within that lens. So it comes down to the medicals. That's going to be something that each team is going to have to discern on their own. Top 30 visits will be a big part of that, with independent medical teams kind of making the final ruling in a case-by-case basis. He's more kind of a top 30. He's like on my first round fringe for sure. And if the medical penalty isn't added to his grade, he is in my top 32. But again, it's not something you can really discount at this point. When you have a deep receiver class, sometimes that's enough of the edge to get a team to look elsewhere.
Gotcha. And Ian, I'm going to have you put on your Dolphins hat now. Like Dolphins podcast, I got to get your opinion for the first time.
Ian, if you say Ty Simpson in the first round, I am leaving here and blocking you on Twitter. That is a promise.
But
I'm going to say Ty Simpson. Just
I know we have Ty Simpson coming in for a 30 visit. I do not want Ty Simpson. I don't think we're going to take Ty Simpson.
Did they actually get him on a 30 visit?
Yeah, they announced today they're bringing him in on a 30. But couple things are clear with Jon-Eric Sullivan. One, I think I've heard him talk to the press more in 3 months than I've heard Chris Grier talk in 10 years. But Ian, you and I were talking about this beforehand. It's so different because we kind of knew what Chris Grier would do, and it was always going to be something that was either taking a low floor, high floor, low ceiling guy, or just go completely off the board and just say, yeah, this guy is just so raw, we're just going to develop him, and it costs you a year because you need him to do something he's not ready to do. Look at Chop Robinson 2 years ago. We take him to be the third edge, and he has to be the number one edge. He's not ready. He wasn't ready for that. He's still not ready for that. And we were saying, been looking at what Green Bay does. So you trade Waddle, you need a wide receiver. Green Bay doesn't take, last year notwithstanding, Green Bay doesn't take first round wide receivers. You're looking, it's like, well, they like taking tackles, moving them inside. Could Mawanoa fall? Could Spencer Fernando fall? Indeed, take him. One of my man crushes in the draft is Vega Iwani. I would take him. I don't know if the Dolphins would take him. Going to have a similar offense last year because Bobby Slowick was on the team last year, promoted him to offensive coordinator. But like we said, we need everything. We need everything except running back. We're trying to extend HN. So if Ian, if you are sitting next to Jon-Eric Sullivan at 11, where would you go and why?
It's a tricky question. Part of it depends on who's on the board, obviously. But like you said, trench play is obviously a big thing with that. And but correct me if I'm wrong, but they've talked about building through the trenches in press conferences,
Yep.
right? So that
Yep.
that's going to be a priority for them moving forward. Obviously, you've got Aaron Brewer coming back, you got Patrick Paul, but Austin Jackson's long-term outlook is a little unclear with the availability, right? And then obviously the right guard spot is a major need. Savai Naya needs to improve in year 2, or is it year 2 or year 3 for him? I believe 2. Okay, that's what I thought. But yeah, needs a bounce back for sure. So again, you're looking at uncertainty there at the guard spot, and I think a couple of the candidates that you mentioned, right? I think Spencer Fano, if they're keeping the similar scheme with Aaron Brewer getting out in space a little bit more, wide zone, I think Fano would probably fit that the best, just because I think he's the best athlete of the bunch, and I think he really excels at, even though he's not the biggest guy, even though he's not the heaviest guy, acquiring leverage and driving his base and keeping that leg action on run plays. And you see on the Utah film, even though he's not built the most powerfully, right? He had 32 1/8 inch arms at the NFL Combine, was a little longer measured at his pro day, which kind of calls into question that the measurement practices, right? But I kind of sit on the fence and try to find a middle ground, right? If optimistically, let's say that he's a little bit longer than his combine measurement, probably still 32 and a half, right? So not the longest guy, not the heaviest guy, but I think he plays up beyond that with his constant lag action. I mean, he's explosive, quick as an athlete, and he weaponizes that as a mover and as a power producer, right? He's so good at driving through blocks. I think he's got the flexibility and hip flexibility to readjust his alignment in that sense as he's on the move. And then at the same time too, he can latch and finish guys in the dirt and in pass protection too. I think that's going to be the biggest question with him, if he's shifting inside his anchor at guard, because at tackle, anchor footwork was a little bit of a concern for Spencer Fano. He was really good at matching guys laterally and retaining positioning, but when the time came to swivel his anchor back and absorb power and stemmy power rushes, he couldn't always do that. Sometimes he'd align too far upright, or he'd just get driven back because he doesn't quite have that anchor strength. So I think that's the big question mark that you're rolling with him, if you want to defer to anchor strength. And this is the key with the Packers, right? Because the two philosophies kind of contrast each other, because Bobby Slowick, if they're keeping the same offense, ideally getting out in space a little bit, moving, athleticism, right? But the Packers in the recent 1 to 2 years, they've kind of undergone a philosophy shift with Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur, where they're going heavier at the guard spots. They drafted Anthony Belton, right? They signed Aaron Banks a few cycles ago in free agency. So they have gotten heavier in the trenches, and that would lend to someone like Francis Mauigoa, right? Who I think has the better anchor strength inside. I think he has the knee bend to acquire leverage and play a little bit lower in that range of the trenches too, but then also has really patient, precise hands. I think is definitely athletic enough to win in a phone booth and keep and stay square to guys, keep them within his frame. And yeah, at the same time too, has some of that finishing urge too. And you mentioned Penn State, Ioane. He's one of those guys who also has the heavy hands and can play square, right? I think the square power is really good with him, where he stays aligned but can also uncork hand force from his hips while staying aligned to guys. And then again, has that finishing mentality too. So it would be a little rich for me at 11 for him personally. But Fano or Mauigoa, depends on what your preference is, right? But I can see the rationale for both of them too. The biggest thing with me though, I really like this guard class, and I do think it has a pretty good amount of depth. If you could get a guy like Keelan Rutledge right on day 2, there's other players too, Emmanuel Pregnon. I'm not a huge fan of Jennings Dunker, but again, I can see it at a certain value. And there's other tackle to guard converts that make a lot of sense later in the draft. I think it's a relatively deep position group that you might be able to get additional options at. And if a player like, say, Mansour Delane is there, right, and you can take him, that's a player who can help reinvent your secondary on day 1, can play the boundary or the nickel, has that high level disruption ability at the catch point, but also good in support. So it depends, because Francis Mauigoa, Spencer Fano, if they're in consideration for the pick, odds are neither of them are going to be my top rated player at that spot right now. So it comes down to, are you going to, give a slight edge to the premium position and go with that route, right? I think that's a safe choice when they're within range. They're both top 20 players on my board, so it's not that much of a reach. But also, you might pass up an opportunity to get a player in Mansour Delane who could end up being a perennial All-Pro down the line, right? So it's small trade-offs, small opportunity costs, but they say they want to build through the trenches. I think if you're going to invest in Malik Willis, who's a quarterback who this is a big leap of faith to pay him in free agency, you got to support him adequately. And I think that part of that starts with solidifying your interior offensive line, making sure he has time to step up. He's not ad-libbing and working off script and relying on his creation ability to a fault. So I can see the philosophy there. My only concern is passing up on a potential top 10 guy as a result.
Yep. You mentioned Mansour Delane to go along with that, because I think he's locked in to the Saints right now. And both of you guys can give this opinion. Especially after this pro day now, does Jermod McCoy come into consideration at 11?
Potentially, yeah. If they were both on the board, I would pick Delane just because I think Delane has a little bit more boundary nickel flex. I think he's better in run support, but Jermod McCoy is still a phenomenal player and a top 12 guy on my board. The comp that I keep coming back to is Darius Slay from a coverage mobility standpoint, because you look at, one thing that both of them have is just that hyper elite hip sync and break malleability, where he can be, playing with inside leverage, vertical trail, wide receiver on the comeback route, and he can sink 170 or 270 degrees and just reduce and swivel and just redirect with barely any fat on his plant and drive. That kind of efficiency and that coverage mobility, that fluidity, that doesn't come around often. And I think if we're looking at coverage mobility, to me, Jermod McCoy is a little bit more explosive than Delane. He's a little bit more fluid than Delane. I think Delane is a little bit more definitely technically sound. I think he's more better in support, as I said, but the upside with Jermod McCoy as a playmaker, as a complete coverage blanket, you can't pass that up either. So both guys are in consideration there. It's just a matter of Delane having the higher support chops, I think.
For me, I love Jermod McCoy. I think the biggest concern for me heading into this draft cycle was, is he going to test at either the Combine or his Pro Day? Where is he at medically? Clearly, if he's testing at the Tennessee Pro Day, which he did today, it feels like he's close enough medically where he'll be ready for week 1 of the year. He'll be ready for a rookie year, and you're not taking a guy as like effectively a redshirt year, year 2 is really the year kind of guy. I think I kind of echo a lot of what Ian said in terms of his hips, in terms of his feet. Look, it's the best of the class. I feel pretty confident in saying those two things are going to be high-level NFL traits day one for him. I think he needs some help at the catch point. I think he can get a little grabby at times. I think he's going to get called for a lot of DPIs in that first year because teams are going to test him and he's going to get called for them. But I think from an athletic standpoint, from a size standpoint, from a hips and footwork standpoint, you can't teach those things. Those are things you've either got or you don't have for the most part. He's got all of them. I feel pretty confident in saying that's a top 15 player in this class. And for a team like the Dolphins, where, truthfully, this is a rebuild year. This is hey, we're going to take our lumps. We're going to, be a bad football team, all things considered. I think Jon-Eric Sullivan effectively said all that when he said that Jalen Waddle didn't fit their timeline at 27 years old. He basically told you what the plan was for this year. I think a guy like Jermod McCoy, you're willing to let him struggle a little bit year one, which I think it will be a little bit ugly really early on in year one, just because I think he's going to get called for some DPIs. I think some of these veteran wide receivers, they're just going to give him some moves and some things that he has not seen. But from a film standpoint, that 2024 film, obviously didn't play in 2025, he's really damn good. And I feel pretty confident in saying that's a top 15 guy. And for a team like the Dolphins, who don't need a guy who's going to be ready to contribute towards a playoff run in year one, I feel like Jermod McCoy is the perfect dart throw that is going to pay off. I feel confident in saying that he's a starter in the NFL long term. Although I do sort of agree with Ian, right? Like, you may need to build the trenches first. I think Jermod McCoy, as much as, you need a cornerback, you also need more consistent trench play on both sides of the ball. And that's something that, man, when you're picking 11 in a draft like this, you may just have to take it and, pass up on the talent.
Yeah. Yeah. And then to move to 30, as we're talking about trench skill, every time I do a mock draft, Ian, it does seem like the edge class is a little more appealing on the second half towards the end of the first round. I'm pretty sure, Kev, I'm not sure if you know, but I'm pretty sure the Dolphins either did a Zoom interview or a top 30 with Zion Young. You have TJ Parker, who seems to be a popular name right now. Based off of going offensive line 11, how we've been talking, is that the way you would go? Or would you say, look, best player is going to be a linebacker, go get CJ Allen, Anthony Hill, someone like that. Go get a safety. Maybe Tiedemann falls there. Maybe the Toledo safety. Based off of how you envision the first round as a whole going, what do you think is going to be the best value at the end of the first? And of course, trade down is always an option because I think the key is going to try and get first draft capital for next year. But where would you go position-wise, and who are some of the players you'd be looking at?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a unique opportunity for the Dolphins, right? Because we mentioned the 11th overall pick. You can go offensive line if you really want to and just kind of take the pick that's going to do the best thing for your team. And then you can kind of go play the value of the board at 30 overall. If a top 20 player falls, I think you can really just take the best player available. But like you said, if that doesn't happen, you do have options. At edge, I'm a little apprehensive. My opinion is that this edge class has a few really good guys at the top, right? Reuben Bain, David Bailey. We talked about Arvell Reese and his projection as well. But then I think there's a little bit of a gap. I do like Akeem Mesidor in the mid to late first round range. Even though you have the questions, I think he'd be a solid starter. I like Keldrick Falk in certain schematic looks, even though the pass rush ability, you're kind of trading off with that early on. You're going to be a high level run defender, but needs development there. And then TJ Parker, Zion Young. I'm a little bit lower on those two guys. I think Zion Young gets elevated sometimes because of the size and explosion, the length, the power profile, and the motor as well in pursuit. But I do see a guy who needs to keep refining his pass rush palette. I don't see I don't see a vast arsenal or consistent counter work. And I do think he's a little stiff in his hips too. So I have him as more of kind of a fringe top 100 guy personally. So the round one stuff is a little high for me. TJ Parker, more of a top 50 guy. But even then, I'd be a little apprehensive with round one because I think of the Clemson defenders who were impacted by the downturn this past year, I think TJ Parker was one guy in particular earlier in the year, especially where the motor, the buy-in, you could see it kind of run hot and cold a little bit. I think toward the end of the year, and performance against a kind of hapless South Carolina offensive line helped a little bit. But he produced a little bit more toward the end. But I view him as more of a guy who doesn't really have elite traits, has pretty good baseline traits across the board. But you need him to buy in to get to his ceiling. And that ceiling is a solid starter. My comp for him is Sean Phillips. I think he's a guy who can be a solid starter in both phases, but don't know if he's going to be a difference maker. I don't know if I take him round one, right? I think round one for the Dolphins, the best options, especially if you go offensive line at 11, right? I think we mentioned KC Concepcion earlier. If he's there, I would love him at 30. I think he'd be a really dynamic option for you. He kind of gets miscast as a slot guy, but he can work against press and beat press. He's got the quickness and the lateral agility and the release package to do that. He can cut really tight angles on route breaks, 90 degrees without losing speed. And even though the hands, people have brought up the drops is a little bit of a concern, I think it's more focus drops than technique. I think, he's going to have to tune up a little bit to NFL physicality and learning to be a little bit tougher working over the middle of the field with contact threats. And some guys get that and some guys don't. But KC Concepcion is such a good receiver in all the other areas that I would be willing to take a gamble on it. And even then, it's not a liability issue. It's just every now and then an opportunity goes uncapitalized, right? So I think he'd be a really good pick there. If they did go offensive line, you could look at defensive back. If Thieneman somehow falls, I'd love that pick for them. I think that'd be a phenomenal value deal. But I think the corner class has some guys too. For me, my best outcome at the edge position, right? I look at the pick 43 in round two. I'd probably be eyeing Gabe Akis from Illinois with that pick, potentially, if you can get him. I think a really good two-phase starter right out of the gate at 6'3", 260, having pretty good explosion, right? Not an elite athlete, but again, a guy who has that functional floor and is well leveraged and competitive in the run, and then has a working pass rush arsenal with power, with chops and clubs and rips, and you can do that. And then Malachi Lawrence is another name, right? A little bit lower in terms of the floor, but if you're looking at a long-term project, right? This guy's got 4.5 speed, 6'4", 250, 34-inch arms, over 40-inch vertical. The explosion, he's got a pretty good pass rush bag. Just needs to add a little bit more mass to his frame. I think contend a little bit better in run defense at the NFL level, but the moral of the story is, in my opinion, I think whether you go corner or defensive back or offensive lineman at 11, I think the value at edge is probably going to line up better on day 2 than it is at 30. So I think at 30, try and get a playmaker if you can. If the value falls well, get a playmaker for your offense potentially, or look at secondary options if you go offensive line early on. I think edge is going to be day 2. And then you can keep filling out your roster at other positions because they have a lot of capital. That's another thing too. That capital gives you flexibility. You can play the value of the board, and you can try and find options later on.
Yeah. Kev, before I get your opinion, I got to say that I love the Casey Concepcion shout. I know we talked to him. The Dolphins have talked to him. That he just screams Buffalo Bill to me. Like, I don't see him getting past Buffalo. It seems like all their fans want him. So knowing their luck, the Chiefs are going to trade up in front of them and get another wide receiver that they want. Mr. S, we did talk about the drops. Like Ian said, and a lot of people, Ian, I've heard you say this, a lot of people say this as well. It does seem like a concentration thing with him, but his route running, probably best route runner in the draft. But yeah, Kev, what do you think?
I sort of agree that with the value that they have, it is very much a, hey man, you can just take best player available, like truly best player available, because I think that there are going to be very few situations where you double dip in a position where you shouldn't double dip. And the only position I would say maybe that is quarterback, which we talked about Ty Simpson, not a first round pick. Running back, the only guy I could think of is like Jadarian Price, and even then I think that's more of a luxury pick than it is a best player available pick. And then maybe, offensive tackle. But even then, I think you just have enough needs there and enough potential flexibility where that even makes sense to double dip if the talent is there. If a guy is falling in this draft, the way I see it, the way that I kind of see the first round going, I think that second first round pick is like the perfect spot for a corner or a safety or a receiver. We talked about Concepcion. We talked about Bell. I think those two guys kind of make some sense. Omar Cooper as well, a very good football player, not getting as much love. Denzel Boston, if you're looking for just I'm going to catch everything, kind of play. I think that's the play. Cornerback wise, I talked about Chris Johnson. I think he's a fit for Miami. I think that's a guy you can take at 30 and feel comfortable about taking him at 30. The other guy is Colton Hood, who I went back and I watched this film, last week, just because I feel like I didn't get a very good gauge of him the first time I watched it. That guy's better than I thought he was. That guy is a lot better than I thought he was. I think that's a first round pick. I think with his physicality, his, some of the stuff that he can do in terms of erasing, plays in tight spaces, I think he does that at an incredibly high level. I think his hips are not anywhere close to as good as like Jermod McCoy's are, but they're still okay. They're playable. They're passable. They're going to not get him killed. I think that his biggest thing is I think he's almost a little bit too physical. And you're going to have to teach some of that physicality out of him because, again, when you go from the college level to the NFL level, you're going to get called for more things as a rookie. You're not going to have the same whistle that you did as an all-conference player at the SEC level, right? The SEC is going to let you get away with more DPIs. They're going to let you get away with more of those things. Once you get to the NFL level, they're going to call those things. And they're going to call them on you because you're a rookie, because you're grabbing him, 10 yards, 15 yards down the field. That's my biggest concern for him right now is I think that he just needs to get a little bit better in terms of playing with that physicality at the right point and not just playing with that physicality 99.999% of the time, but in terms of being a physical zone coverage corner, which I think is probably a mold that really fits what Jeff Hafley wants to do with this defense. Colton Hood is a day one starter there, and he's a guy who's going to only continue to grow as he gets more playing time, as he gets more NFL level coaching. I think you look at Chris Johnson, you look at Colton Hood, you look at Emmanuel McNeil-Warren from Toledo, a hard-hitting safety who's, an athletic player and, athletically gifted. Dylan Thieneman, I think he's good, but again, I don't know if he's like a top 20 guy. At 30, I feel a little bit more comfortable taking him. If he falls, but I think that there's enough secondary talent where, you can go offensive tackle at 11, go, corner safety at 30, and then start looking at edge rusher at wide receiver, because I think when you look into the second and third round, that's where those positions become a little bit more intriguing to me, because we're talking about guys who may not be ready to be day one guaranteed starters or day one guaranteed studs, but they have so much potential. A guy like Malachi Lawrence, again, is kind of in that mold of like, he's probably not going to be very productive his rookie year, but year 2, year 3, we're talking about a completely different player. I think on day 2, that's where the Miami Dolphins can really use that capital to their advantage of taking guys like that. And then at wide receiver, when you get to the third, fourth round, there's guys I really like in that kind of range that, there may not be always go there. They may not be wide receiver ones, but they're wide receiver 2s, they're wide receiver 3s who are going to help you round out a room that looks a little bit more complete than it was, 2 years ago with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as your only 2 playable wide receivers.
Been going an hour. Ian, just a couple more questions for you, and then we'll let you go. We really do appreciate you joining us. Something Jon-Eric Sullivan has really preached since he got hired is you draft a quarterback every year or every other year. Looking at this class, I hope this is one of the every other year kind of classes, because I'm not a fan of this class. But if you were to say, okay, here's someone to develop, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say. But if you were going to take a day 3 quarterback to try and develop, who would you say that's the guy who has the tools that I can work with?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in this QB class, I would probably not take a QB until one of their last 2 or 3 picks, probably in 200s. I'm not trying to, especially in this class where the depth is kind of in the middle. It's kind of like a bell curve. I'm trying to take as many dart throws as I can on guys who could potentially contribute in the day 3 range. But in the 200s, a couple QBs that I like relative to their consensus ranking, who I would be willing to invest in. I'll give two options. One of them is a really traits-rich guy who has some uncertainty with his projection. The other is an experienced, established player with really good efficiency numbers, really low turnover rate. The first one is Jack Strand from MSU Moorhead. 6'5", 240, ran a 4.7 something, had a 35-inch vertical, 10.2 broad. So right away the physical traits pop, and then on the film too, you see a player who is athletic for his size, but then has really good arm talent too. I think the ability to throw from different arm angles and generate velocity and drive outside the numbers, over the middle of the field. He's flashed the ability to throw with anticipation. The processing profile definitely needs work before it gets to an NFL level. And that's why if you're talking about developmental, like this guy's going to be your third QB, ideally. Get a veteran, let him just, take reps and soak things in behind the scenes. But he's got the physical tools. He's got the toughness and the competitive temperament. And there are some really bright flashes of keeping his eyes up off script, and then off platform throwing on the run. He's very good at keeping his shoulders level and maintaining accuracy and still being able to deliver in a timely manner too. So Jack Strand has the talent to develop, has the raw tools to kind of mold behind the scenes. And then the other QB, just to add depth to your QB room. And I think that if he needs to get thrust into a spot starting role, right, or a backup in relief, I think you could do it at a pretty decent level for a day 3 guy. Joe Fagnano from UConn is a guy that I like a lot relative to his draft capital, his projected draft capital. He's got the prototypical frame. He's got decent arm strength, right? Not going to blow the doors off or anything, but looking at his film, I think you see a really well-rounded operational skill set. His mechanics are sound. He's generally in rhythm and on time in the pocket. He's shown that he can go through his progressions and work to the backside of plays. He's shown that he can throw with measured anticipation, right? And then I think he's pretty tough in the pocket. I think he's shown that he can throw with accuracy. And I believe he only had 1 or 2 interceptions this past year, right? So, and that kind of tracks on the film where you see a guy who's pretty risk averse, mostly to a positive, right? Obviously, when you see guys with not a ton of interceptions, the other concern that you might have is, they're not seeing the windows. So they're not actually testing those windows that, would be more risky, right? Joe Fagnano is willing to test those windows. He's willing to throw up the seam. He's willing to, hit those fleeting opportunities that are closing with a corner and a safety kind of converging. But he's also got a pretty well attuned risk palette where he knows when to take the chance and when to check it down. And I think that reasoning, that discernment is going to be really important in a backup role too. So one guy's really traits rich, one guy's a little uncertain, kind of making the leap from the Division III level to the NFL. You don't know exactly how he's going to project, but the athletic and physical tools are there to a high degree. And he was a Harlan Hill finalist. He was very productive at that level. And then you have Joe Fagnano, who, again, older rookie, not going to have starting upside or anything, but to infuse your QB room with depth and reliable operational ability where, if he does have to play in a pinch, he can do so reliably and at least keep the offense humming, keep it afloat.
You actually surprised me because I was expecting one of Drew Aller, Taylon Green, or Cole Payton to be mentioned because it seems like those are the three toolsy guys that
Cole Payton, of those three, probably Cole Payton is the most compelling to me. But
I feel like, Brett, you're forgetting the most obvious option of Kyle Shanahan tree quarterback of all time, which is Garrett Nussmeier, because I feel like every single Kyle Shanahan disciple who calls offensive plays has turned on his film and went, yeah, I can fix him. Yeah, I got this one.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's funny. One of the guys in our Discord, he's a North Dakota grad, so he hates North Dakota State, but he saw it. And every day he gets mad because everybody's like Cole Payton quarterback 3 in this draft. And he's just like, what are they seeing? He can't throw the ball. He just runs.
A little insane. I feel like we're losing the plot of this quarterback class if he's quarterback 3. But
this QB class, man, honestly, past the top 2, it's anyone's ranking because I would probably have Garrett Nussmeier QB3 still.
I think about the point where it's like Nussmeier 3, Klubnik 4, and then after that I'm like, I don't know, man, just anyone else.
It's crazy, man. It's so up for debate, and that's where it's kind of, people talk about QB being an all or nothing position. You either draft one early or really late because the middle of the draft you want to infuse your roster, and I can see the argument there for this class. But guys like Cole Payton, Drew Aller, Jack Strand, even like Taylon Green, they've all got their warts for sure. It's about sifting through. Cole Payton specifically, when I watched the film, again, the athleticism pops, the arm talent pops, the internal clock is pretty slow right now. I think he needs more experience. Slow. Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where he's not going to be able to start right away at the NFL level. And it's kind of tricky because sometimes guys need experience to quicken that. Sometimes it doesn't get faster. Sometimes it's always a tick behind. At the Senior Bowl, it was kind of an issue sometimes too, being a little late on reads. So I definitely more of a developmental project for me, and I think that's what you're going to see with most of these guys too. With Drew Aller, it's the mechanics are really, really rough, and that contributes to the accuracy. And then with Taylon Green, just a lot of general throwing things and quarterbacking things too, inconsistency there.
Taylon Green's great if you're looking for an athlete,
for sure.
For a quarterback,
It's tricky. Like at a certain draft capital, it's worth the investment, maybe, but also if there's a potential steal on the board at another position, might just be better served to wait until 220 or 240 or somewhere around that range.
Yep. All right, and I'm going to let have you go on this last one. Everybody has their guys in the draft, so I want to hear, who are your 5 guys? They can be guys that you like. They can be the normal guys everybody's talking about, or they can be the day 2, day 3 guys that you're like, these are my guys. I'm saying he is going to outperform all expectations.
I love these questions because they allow me to geek out a little bit on some guys. So I'll go with my first one. It's kind of a cliche one with this class, but D'Angelo Pons. I'm a big fan of him. I've got a top 15 grade on him, and I was really struggling with it for a little bit because like, he's a size outlier, man. He's such a size outlier. How do I have him this high? But really, you scrutinize every other compartment of his game, and he's so technically sound. He's an elite athlete, right? He ran a 10.48 100-meter dash. He had a 43.5-inch vertical. He's super fluid and malleable, and he's got great hip sync and the ability to kind of swivel and manage hip leverage on 2-on-1s and stuff like that. And then he has some technical variability too, where he can play zone, really good in zone, but I think he can play some off-man catch technique as well. And he's a playmaker at the catch point who can play with precise physicality, right? That's always something that you like to see. And then in support too, I think he had a very low missed tackle rate as well. So, I think size is a definite concern with him. And it's one reason that a team like the Dolphins come from the Packers, the Brian Gutekunst tree. Brian Gutekunst was a big fan of size speed and length at the CB position. So like Pons might not be on their board, but he's a phenomenal football player, and I think he's going to have a great career. Brene Conga from Louisville is one that I actually just got to from my final watch a few days ago, and I was a really big fan of what I saw there. He had a 37-inch vertical, 10-2 broad at his pro day at 6'3", 299, 33-inch arms. So if you're looking for a defensive tackle, a 3-tech who can also split out to 5-tech and even took some reps at 7-tech from wide alignments and just used that power profile. Super explosive, super powerful guy who can reset the contact point, encumber double teams. And I think the upside is the arrow is trending up as a pass rusher too, even though the production isn't quite there. He does a lot of the dirty work, kind of being a pain for offensive linemen and allowing his teammates to make plays. So I like Brene Conga a lot. Matthew Hibner from SMU is one guy that I like a lot in the tight end class. A guy who I think the production was a little bit lower than people would have liked, but you watch that SMU offense, and I do think there's an argument to make that with Kevin Jennings at the helm, a dynamic athlete, creator, but things go off script very often in that offense, and I think it affected the consistency of production a little bit. Matthew Hibner does have a little bit of room to improve his plant and drive footwork and efficiency, but overall, I think the STEM IQ, the athleticism at 6'4", 250 is really strong. And then he's a really good blocker too. I was taken aback in a good way by him having close to average size for the position, but his hand power and his proactivity on the attack, on blocks, right? Whether working in line or inserting to the B gap, working out in space. He's very proactive, very aggressive. And at the Senior Bowl, he was the best tight end there. When you talk about STEM IQ, the ability to work vertically up seams and make catches with defenders kind of encroaching over top, and then showing off some run after catch ability too. So he's a top 5 tight end for me in the class, actually. And I'm a big fan of his two-phase ability. I'm going to try and rattle through 2 more really quick, if I can think of one. I'm trying to think right now.
While you're doing that, I will say Hibner being a good blocker doesn't surprise me because he was a Jim Harbaugh tight end. He was.
Yes. Yeah. Michigan tight end U. That's right. He originated there. And I don't blame him for not being able to break through because they've had a ongoing chain of guys who've been very proficient at that position. I have 2 more. My first one, Traden Stukes from Arizona. Big fan of him. He's got nickel ability, safety ability, super explosive and fast on the vertical plane, but also twitched up and pretty fluid, I think, with his hip sync. And then he's very instinctive too. He first caught my eye a few years ago. Maybe it was 2 years ago when he showed off that explosiveness for sure. The medicals have been a question for him. He's going to be an older rookie, so that might push him down. But I think a win now team is going to be very well served to take him, and they're going to get an instant starter, high-level starter. My final one, Aiden Fisher, linebacker from Indiana. Super instinctive player, not an elite athlete, but very, very instinctive. One of the best processing grades that I gave in the entire class. I think he's a competent athlete for sure. I think he's physical. I think he's pretty good in coverage with his fluidity and his zone IQ. I think he's going to be one of those guys who gets overlooked because the athletic profile isn't elite, but he'll go on to be a really solid starter.
Like all those guys, those are all guys I think at one point or another I have mocked to the Dolphins this cycle. Yeah, we're getting up to the hour, 50 minutes. Ian, again, thank you for joining us. I know this is a busy time for you. When is your next mock draft coming out?
Yeah, so I've got one more on the docket. It'll be right before the NFL draft, actually. So it'll be 2 or 3 days in the lead up to it. I'll know the exact day a little bit closer, but one more on the eve of the draft, and then we're just on to the big event and holding on to see what happens. It's going to be fun.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you do go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. It does help us. Definitely give Ian support. He does put out some great work. And as you saw listening to us, he does have a different big board from the consensus, which is very appreciative because I always like hearing new takes on people. It makes me think about different players because the thing I complain about is we always get used to hearing the same guys for the same teams. So just getting a different look on it was good. And Kev, anything? And
most importantly, he didn't have Ty Simpson as a Dolphin in this. So you know what? He's now my best friend. Until he inevitably mocks him there.
I thought about saying Garrett Nussmeier to give you the old bait and switch there, but
I wouldn't hate Garrett Nussmeier after like round 2.
You would have hated him at 30. But
at 30, I would have still left and blocked you on Twitter. That rule still stands for any quarterback outside of Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah. I'm glad I dodged the bullet. I'm glad.
Yeah. But everybody, thank you for joining us. We will be back later this week. Definitely support Kevin and Ian on Twitter. They put out a lot of good work. Hope everybody has a great rest of the week. So have a good night, everybody.